Every time this retired serviceman came into town for supplies, he did the same thing. Kept his hat low, avoided cameras, and paid in cash.
Hey everyone! I finally made it to the coast.
Tessa was only live streaming her trip.
Look at this place.
She had no idea the man behind her was trying not to be seen. Grant's face appeared on the live stream for less than 2 seconds.
Is that live? Did you say where you are?
He didn't ask what she filmed, only how far the video had already traveled. Tessa deleted the video, but elsewhere his face had already been saved. 2 seconds online told the men searching for Grant that he was alive. Why did an ordinary retired serviceman fear a camera, and who had waited 11 years to find him? To understand that, we go back to the beginning. Hours earlier, Grant Calder woke before the generator timer clicked. He lay still for a few seconds, listening to the house settle around him. Wind moved through the spruce beyond the eastern wall. Somewhere beneath the floorboards, old plumbing ticked once as the temperature changed. Nothing else. He got dressed in the same clothes he wore most days, an old olive tactical combat shirt softened by years of washing, moss green combat pants worn pale at the knees, brown work boots scarred at the toes, and the black-faced field watch on his left wrist. At 50, Grant still carried himself like a man who expected his body to answer when asked. He stood 6 feet tall, lean rather than bulky, with a square jaw, high cheekbones, weathered fair skin, and grey-blue eyes that usually noticed a room before anyone noticed him. His dark brown hair was short at the sides and slightly longer on top, with only a few silver strands at the temples. He kept his face clean-shaven. Nothing about him advertised the life he had left behind. Rook was already in the kitchen. The 5-year-old German shepherd had placed himself directly in front of the coffee cabinet. Grant stopped in the doorway. Rook looked up. Honeygold fur framed a soft black mask around his eyes and muzzle. A broad black saddle crossed both shoulders, narrowed along the middle of his back, then widened unevenly over his left hip. A pale gold teardrop marking sat low on his right flank. His left ear stood straight. The right did too, except for the small V-shaped notch missing from its tip. Move. Rook did not move. Grant looked at the cabinet, then at the dog. You're between me and coffee. That's a poor long-term strategy. Rook's dark amber eyes stayed on him. Grant opened another cabinet, took out a strip of dried beef, and tore off a small piece. Rook stood immediately, corrupt. The dog accepted the evidence and stepped aside. 3 years earlier, a veterinarian on the mainland had called Grant about a shepherd whose owner had died. Rook had disliked hands near his neck and refused to sleep behind a closed door. Grant disliked people behind him and rarely slept through the night. Neither had required an explanation from the other. It had been enough. By 7, Grant had coffee, the weather report, and a list of supplies he could not postpone another week. Dog food, batteries, electrical connectors, coffee, antiseptic, engine oil, fuel if Martin Kells decided not to make a conversation out of it. Grant looked toward Rook. Mainland. Rook was at the door before he finished the word. The island sat far enough off the main coast that most people had no reason to come near it. A weathered cedar house stood above a narrow private dock, with spruce crowding the slope behind it, and grey Atlantic water on every other side. Grant had bought the place because there was no passing traffic, no neighbor close enough to borrow tools, and no road leading anywhere. For years, he had mistaken those things for peace. He loaded 2 empty fuel cans and a canvas bag into the boat. Rook stepped aboard and moved toward the bow. The crossing took less than an hour in good weather. That morning, the sea stayed manageable. At the mainland marina, Grant tied off near the far end of the dock. Rook jumped down first, then stopped. Grant nearly walked into him. Rook's body had gone still. No growl, no raised hackles. His head simply lifted toward the marina office. A new black dome camera had been mounted beneath the eave. A tiny blue status light glowed under the housing. Grant's fingers tightened once around the dock line. He lowered the brim of his weathered cap and chose the longer path around the fuel area, adding 40 feet to the walk. Rook followed. Martin Kells noticed. Martin was 58, thick through the neck and torso, with a broad, clean-shaven face turned permanently red by salt wind and 19 years behind the same marina counter. His thinning grey hair was combed straight back. When he believed someone had brought trouble onto his property, his thumbs found his belt and stayed there. He had spent decades dealing with summer visitors who ignored storm warnings, damaged rented equipment, left trash on docks, and blamed locals for their own mistakes. Somewhere along the way, vigilance had hardened into certainty. He trusted people he understood. Grant had never given him much to understand. "You always take the long way around that camera?" Martin called. Grant set 2 fuel cans beside pump 3. "Pump working?" Martin looked toward the new camera, then back at him. "You pay cash. You keep that hat down. You never give anybody more than 2 words." Grant took folded bills from his pocket. 3 words today. Martin's mouth flattened. An old fisherman near the receipt printer glanced once at Grant, then returned to folding a slip of paper that was already folded. A woman at the ice freezer lifted her phone, saw the tension at the counter, and lowered it again without unlocking the screen. Martin took the money. People notice things, Calder. They should. That answer seemed to irritate Martin more than an argument would have. Grant left the empty fuel cans beside the pump while Martin went to reset the card terminal. He walked toward the supply counter instead. That was when Tessa Monroe came through the side entrance. She was 40, about 5'6", with warm, fair skin and light freckles across the bridge of her nose. Hazel green eyes sat beneath loose strands of chestnut auburn hair pulled into a low ponytail. A faded tan field jacket covered a cream Henley, and dark blue jeans fell over brown hiking boots. A charcoal canvas crossbody bag rested against one hip. Around one wrist was a braided bracelet in muted olive and faded burgundy, tied with a slightly crooked handmade knot. Tessa had spent almost 6 years helping care for her mother through a long illness. After her mother died, the quiet at home became harder than the hospital noise had ever been. She began driving. Small towns, state roads, cheap motels, coastlines she had only seen in photographs. Sometimes she live-streamed part of the trip to a modest group of people who had followed her travels. Not because she wanted strangers to know everything, because talking into the phone made an empty road feel less empty. That morning she was filming herself. The front-facing camera stayed on her face as she walked slowly along the marina, occasionally turning her shoulders to let the harbor fill the background behind her. "Hey, everyone. I finally made it to the coast," she said, smiling into the screen. "Look at this place." Grant was 20 feet behind her. He did not notice the phone. He was watching the fixed security camera over the marina office and adjusting his path to stay outside its cleanest angle. That detour carried him directly behind Tessa. She turned slightly toward the water. For less than 2 seconds, Grant's face appeared over her shoulder in the livestream. His cap was still on. It simply did not hide enough from that angle. Tessa kept talking. Grant saw his own reflection in the edge of her phone screen. He stopped. "Is that Liv?" Tessa turned. The easy expression left her face. "Yes." "Did you say where you are?" "The marina?" "Yeah." "Why?" Think about what had just happened. Grant had changed his path to avoid one camera, and that choice had carried him into another. He had built his life around controlling who could find him. Now, a woman who didn't even know his name had taken that control away in less than 2 seconds. The question was no longer why Grant hated cameras. It was what those 2 seconds had just set in motion. Grant looked at the screen. "Delete it." Tessa stared at him for a moment. His voice was not threatening. That made the request stranger. She ended the live stream, then deleted the saved copy from her phone. "It's gone." Grant nodded once. Martin returned to the counter with a receipt roll in one hand. Grant looked at the fuel cans, then at the camera above the office. "Forget the fuel." Martin frowned. "Your choice." Grant picked up the supplies he had already purchased and walked back toward the dock. Rook fell into step beside him. Tessa watched until they disappeared between two boats. 10 minutes later, while sitting in her SUV with the engine off, her phone vibrated. A blank account had sent one line. "Do you know the man from the dock?" Tessa read it twice. She did not answer. She drove north. At the first intersection, she turned left toward the highway. A grey SUV turned left behind her. At the next road, Tessa made an unplanned right. The grey SUV made the same turn. Far offshore, Grant kept one hand on the boat's wheel. Rook stood at the bow. The mainland grew smaller behind them. Grant did not look back. He had no idea that 2 seconds had been enough. By the time the island came back into view, the afternoon had flattened into cold grey light. Rook stayed at the bow until Grant dropped the engine to idle. Grant tied off, lifted 2 grocery bags onto the dock, then returned for coffee, batteries, electrical connectors, antiseptic, engine oil, and the 20-pound dog food bag Rook immediately inspected. The empty fuel cans remained where Grant had left them in the boat. The gauge was lower than he liked. He would deal with that another day. Inside the house, Grant started the generator and put away the groceries. Rook appeared before the coffee cabinet opened. Grant took out a strip of dried beef. Rook sat. "You had breakfast." The dog kept staring. "That is not an appeal." Rook's notched right ear leaned slightly outward. Grant tore off a small piece anyway. Still corrupt. For the next 2 hours, the island became ordinary again. Tools clicked against a workbench. Wind brushed the siding. Grant replaced a corroded connector on the marine radio and adjusted the generator until it stopped running rich. Rook slept under the kitchen table. At 6:43, Grant opened the desk in the corner of the living room and took out an old, scratched laptop. Months sometimes passed without him turning it on. It held little that looked personal. No family photographs. No music library. No ordinary social accounts. What it did hold was a dormant monitoring profile built years earlier around a small set of corporate names, public filings, and identifiers Grant had never quite convinced himself to delete. Most had been quiet for a long time. He opened the account. An amber notification sat beside a folder that had shown no activity in more than 4 years. Grant stopped moving. Behind him, Rook lifted his head. Grant opened the folder. One image, his own face, slightly blurred, cap visible. Grey-blue eyes turned towards something outside the frame. The marina. Grant looked at the timestamp. The live stream had ended at 11:06 a.m. The still image had been captured at 11:17. 11 minutes. He leaned back. That was not someone stumbling across a travel video that evening. Someone had been waiting for a match. Grant opened the routing information attached to the alert. Most of it was old public data, corporate registrations, vendor relationships, archived domain references, security service contracts. He had no access to internal marina reports and did not try to obtain any. One company name appeared repeatedly, Harbor Shield Analytics. Grant remembered the laminated brochure beside Martin's register. Remote security monitoring, theft prevention, vessel protection, incident reporting for small marinas. He pulled public corporate records. Harbor Shield belonged to a holding company. That company shared a registered agent with another firm. The chain thinned after that. Association was not proof, but one archived name attached to an older filing was enough to stop Grant's breathing for a beat. Adrian Sloan. Grant closed the record, then opened it again. In memory, Adrian still had dark hair instead of the grey he would wear now, a long, controlled face, and a habit of lowering his voice when everyone else became louder. He had never needed to shout. Rook walked over and pressed his muzzle against Grant's thigh. Grant lowered a hand between the dog's ears. No. He was not sure whether he meant the screen, the name, or 11 years of silence. The public records did not tell him what Martin had reported, if anything. They told him only what Harbor Shield asked participating marinas to collect. Unusual vessel activity, recurring customer behavior, arrival patterns, incidents, security concerns. Grant knew what that could become in the wrong hands. A boat description, a rough schedule, a direction of travel, not an island address, enough to narrow water. The livestream had not found him. It had given a face to a pattern someone may already have been watching. Grant reopened the archived livestream data. Tessa Monroe's public username was attached. He found enough public information to identify her. Then he reached for the satellite phone. His thumb hovered above the keypad. Something else on the archived image caught his eye. A marker had been placed around his face. Another marker sat around Tessa's username. Under it was one word. Sangsu? Grant went still. Rook pushed his nose under Grant's wrist. The phone shifted an inch. Grant looked down at him. The dog was not warning him about anything. Rook simply knew the difference between Grant sitting at a desk and Grant disappearing somewhere inside himself. Grant picked up the phone. Then an old image surfaced. 2 suitcases on hardwood at 4 in the morning. A teammate standing beside a family car, shoulders broad enough to fill the doorway. Both hands needed to close a trunk because one would not stop shaking. His wife sat in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead. Their house behind them was half-packed. A wedding photograph lay face down on a hallway table because nobody had remembered to wrap it. They had not chosen the case. They had simply stood too close to someone who had. That morning had given Grant a rule he kept long after everything else changed. Distance was the safest thing he knew how to give another person. If he contacted Tessa, he would create a connection. If whoever had copied the livestream was only confirming his face, a direct warning could prove she mattered. If he said nothing, perhaps the attention would die with the deleted video. It sounded rational. That frightened him more than if it had sounded foolish. He set the phone down. 40 miles inland, the grey SUV disappeared when Tessa pulled into a crowded gas station. She waited 5 minutes, then 10. Nothing. By the time she reached the roadside motel, she had almost convinced herself she had built a threat out of coincidence. Almost. She locked the room door, washed her face, came back to the bed. Her phone lit again. Different blank account. Did he tell you where he lives? Tessa sat slowly. She took a screenshot, then another that included the account information. She did not answer. After a minute, she moved a chair beneath the door handle. On the island, Grant kept working through public records. Harbor Shield had too many ordinary clients to prove anything by itself. The corporate links were suggestive, not dispositive, and Adrian's name sat on an old filing, not a confession. Grant knew the difference between seeing a pattern and proving one. At 9:12, Rook stood beside the stove. Grant kept reading. Rook walked into the short hall toward the front door, stopped, his head lifted. Rook! The dog did not turn. Grant closed the laptop. Wind moved through the spruce. A loose gutter tapped the siding. Then, after several seconds, Grant heard it. An engine, low, far out on the water. He crossed to the eastern window without turning on the porch light. A single white navigation light moved beyond the cove. Too slow for a working lobster boat heading home. Too late for one of the summer families. Too far inside the shoals for someone unfamiliar with the island to wander there casually. Grant watched the light change course. Toward shore. Rook stood beside him. Neither moved. The light advanced another 100 yards. Then it went out. Grant did not turn on another light. Rook stood beside the eastern window, body angled toward the water. His tail hung low and still. The left ear was rigid. The notched right ear leaned toward the faint sound beyond the trees. A soft scrape came from below the house. Wood against stone. A boat being eased onto shore. Grant crossed to the radio. Static. He tried again. Nothing. The generator coughed once behind the house, then stopped. Every light died. The refrigerator hum vanished. Grant could hear Rook breathing. Someone knew where the generator sat. That mattered more than the darkness. Grant sent one emergency message with the island coordinates before the weak signal disappeared. Rook moved toward the hall. Grant touched 2 fingers to his shoulder. Stay. Rook looked up. Grant had never trained him for gunfire or entries. There had been no reason. Rook knew sit, stay, come, leave it, and the highly selective meaning of move when lying in front of the coffee cabinet. That was enough for the life they had built. It was supposed to be enough. Gravel shifted outside. One set of footsteps. Another. More. A pale flashlight moved once across the side window and disappeared. Someone tested the back door. Grant stepped away from the glass. His breathing slowed. Not because he was calm, because some older part of him remembered how. The first window broke in the utility room. Rook flinched but did not bark. A man whispered outside. Another answered from farther away. 5, Grant thought. Maybe. A dark figure crossed the kitchen window. Grant moved deeper into the hall. He did not chase anyone. A second crash came from the rear of the house. Then everything happened too quickly for clean memory. A door struck a wall. A flashlight swept through darkness. Grant collided with a body in the hall. The light hit the floor and rolled beneath a chair, throwing crooked shadows across the ceiling. Rook barked once. Deep. Sharp. Rook. Back. The dog retreated 2 steps. Another man appeared at the kitchen entrance. There was a struggle. A weapon hit the floor. A shot cracked somewhere outside. The sound entered Grant's body before it entered the room. For half a second he was no longer in Maine. Hot air. Concrete dust. A stairwell 11 years gone. Someone calling a name nobody used anymore. Grant froze. Half a second. Maybe less. It was enough. Rook moved. No. The shepherd launched past Grant toward the figure coming through the broken doorway. Another violent sound filled the kitchen. Grant saw Rook twist, then disappear behind the table. Something inside Grant went completely still. The rest came apart in fragments. A chair overturned. Glass under boots. Someone running toward the shore. A man on the floor near the utility room, groaning and holding one arm tight against his body. Another unable to stand near the back wall. 2 shapes that did not move. Grant did not pursue the man who fled toward the water. Every old instinct told him how little distance remained between the house and shoreline. Instead, he turned toward the kitchen. Rook. No movement. Grant crossed the room. The dog lay on his side between the table and cabinets. His eyes were open. Grant dropped to both knees. Hey! Rook's left ear moved. Barely. Grant slid both arms beneath him. Rook was heavy. Grant had carried heavier things. None had ever felt like this. He brought the dog toward the stove, where the 2 ceramic bowls still sat, and lowered him onto a folded blanket. Grant's hands began working automatically, checking, pressing, assessing. Then the old training stopped being useful. He knew it before he allowed the words into his head. No. Rook's breathing came shallow and uneven. Grant reached for the emergency phone. The first call failed. The second connected for 3 seconds. The third reached dispatch. Grant gave the coordinates, described armed intruders, said there were casualties, said 2 men were alive and injured, and said one had fled toward the shoreline. Then his voice changed. I need a veterinarian. The dispatcher asked him to repeat himself. My dog is hurt. Marine units and local responders were already moving. The nearest emergency veterinary clinic was on the mainland. Grant knew the crossing time. He knew the weather. He knew Rook. All right. He ended the call. Salt air entered through the broken window. Grant kept one hand against Rook's chest. The shepherd looked at him. Grant shifted to reach for another towel. Rook tried to raise his head. The effort barely moved him. Grant stopped immediately. He sat back down. Both hands returned to the dog. I'm here. Rook's head settled again. Grant did not tell him he was brave. He did not promise everything would be fine. For 3 years, their agreement had been simpler. Breakfast. Doors left open. A place beside the stove. A hand between the ears when neither of them wanted anything from the other. Stay. Come. I'm here. Rook took another breath. Then another. The next one did not come. Grant waited anyway. His hand stayed against the honey-gold fur. The clock on the wall had stopped when the generator died. Time became useless. Picture this. The one living thing that never asked who you used to be, never cared what you had done, never demanded an explanation, gone because the past finally found your address. What would justice look like in that moment? And how easily could it begin to look exactly like revenge? Grant lowered his forehead to the fur between Rook's ears. Then he stood. The two injured men were still where he had left them. One had lost consciousness. The other watched Grant move through the room. Grant did not look at him. At the bottom of the bedroom closet sat a gray metal case beneath two folded blankets. Grant pulled it out. Dust marked the lid. He opened it. Old credentials. A compact notebook filled with names and numbers written in a tighter hand than Grant used now. A sealed envelope. Equipment he had kept because some habits survived long after their usefulness. One photograph turned face down. Grant did not touch the photograph. His hand rested on the edge of the case. Anger had arrived now. Not loud anger. Clarity. Adrian Sloane had spent 11 years somewhere beyond the horizon of Grant's life. Tonight, someone had crossed that horizon. Grant knew people. He knew routes. He knew patterns. He knew what a man like Adrian needed in order to stay protected. And somewhere inside that grey case was enough of Grant's former self to begin walking backward. His eyes moved toward the kitchen. Rook's water bowl caught a strip of moonlight, still half full. Rook had been 5. Not old. Not finished. Grant closed the metal case. The latch clicked once. Then again. He put it back beneath the blankets. When he returned to the living room, he took the satellite phone from the desk. This time he did not hesitate. Do not return to your motel. Go somewhere public. Call the police. Do not tell anyone where I live. The message sent. Too late to be the warning he should have given earlier. Early enough, he hoped, to matter. Outside, an engine approached from the west, then another. Blue-white lights appeared between the trees near the dock. Grant stepped onto the porch with both hands visible. The first responder up the path was Deputy Seth Mallory, 44. Broad through the shoulders with the slight forward bend of a man who had spent years climbing in and out of patrol boats. He had short, sandy hair, a weather-reddened face, and a trimmed reddish-brown beard. 14 years in the coastal district had taught him not to mistake quiet people for cooperative ones, or frighten people for guilty ones. His sidearm remained holstered. Grant Calder? Yes. You armed? There are weapons inside. None on me. Mallory studied him, then noticed Grant's hands. One was trembling. Anyone else in the house? 2 injured, 2 dead. And the 5th ran for the shoreline. A Marine patrol officer behind Mallory spoke into a radio. Another team had stopped a small boat less than a mile south of the island. 1 man aboard, alive. Responders moved through the house. Grant remained on the porch. When asked for the weapon he had used, he told them where it was and let an officer retrieve it. When asked whether he knew the attackers, he said no. Mallory looked toward the broken kitchen window. Why would 5 armed men cross open water at night for you? Grant looked past him toward the dark sea. That's a longer answer. Mallory held his gaze. Tonight looks long. An officer came from the house carrying a clear evidence bag. Inside was a cheap phone recovered from one of the attackers. The screen showed a recently accessed contact. AS. Logistics. Grant's jaw tightened. Mallory noticed. You know it? Grant looked at the letters. Not yet. Near dawn, more investigators arrived. Temporary lights turned the yard pale. Boots crossed the porch. Radios murmured. Grant sat in the old wooden chair beside the front door. Without thinking, he lowered his left hand beside the chair. His fingers stopped 6 inches above the floor. That was where Rook usually put his head. Grant left his hand there for a moment, then slowly closed it. Tessa was already gone when the first patrol car reached the motel. She had read Grant's message twice. Then she stopped asking whether she was overreacting. The chair under the door handle suddenly looked foolish. The parking lot outside her window was too dark. Her SUV was too recognizable. The room had one useful exit. Tessa packed what mattered into the crossbody bag, left the suitcase behind, and went through the rear service door. She did not run. Running would have made her feel hunted. 3 blocks away, she found a laundromat with an open 24 hours sign buzzing above broad glass windows. Inside, fluorescent light bounced off chrome washer doors. 3 security cameras covered the entrance, change machine, and back hall. An elderly man folded towels near the dryers. A woman in hospital scrubs sat with her shoes off, reading something on her phone while 2 machines turned behind her. Tessa chose a plastic chair with a clear view of both doors. Then she called the police. She gave them the anonymous messages, the grey SUV, Grant's warning. Then she sent her location to her older sister. "I'm okay. I'll explain tomorrow." She hated the sentence as soon as she sent it. Her mother had used sentences like that during the first months of treatment. "I'm okay." Even when she was not, Tessa put the phone face down on her knee. A patrol officer arrived 15 minutes later and remained outside until another unit came. No dramatic rescue, no sirens, just procedure. That helped. By 3 in the morning, Tessa had given the same account twice and learned almost nothing in return. Police would say only that there had been an incident on an island offshore and Grant Calder was alive. She asked about Rook. No one answered. That frightened her more than if they had. Grant did not leave the island until late the following morning. Temporary evidence markers still stood inside the kitchen. The broken window had been covered with plywood. Rook's water bowl remained where Grant had left it. He had asked that nobody move it. Mallory did not argue. The deputy handed him a paper cup of coffee. "The woman from the marina is safe." Grant's fingers tightened around the cup. "Where? Police have her." Grant looked toward the water. Mallory watched him. "You knew they might go after her." Grant said nothing. "That isn't an accusation. It should be." Mallory let the silence sit. "You gave us what you could. For now. Major Crimes wants you available and reachable. You're not under arrest. Don't make me regret saying that. I won't. I've heard that before." Grant looked at him. Mallory almost smiled. "Not from you." The laundromat was still open when Grant reached town. Tessa sat at a folding table near the window with a paper cup between both hands. Her ponytail had mostly come loose. She had not slept. The freckles across her nose stood out against skin gone pale from fatigue. She saw Grant through the glass before he reached the door. Her expression changed, not relief. Grant stepped inside. Tessa stood. "You. Unfortunately. Are you the reason that SUV followed me?" Grant did not look away. "Yes." The answer landed harder because it came without qualification. "When did you know that might happen?" "Last night." "When last night?" "Before they came to the island." "And when did you warn me?" Grant said nothing. Tessa's lower jaw tightened. "Were you certain enough to go home and lock your door?" Grant looked at her. The question found exactly what she intended. "I went home because I thought distance would keep you out of it." That worked beautifully. "I know." Tessa had prepared for excuses. The absence of one left her nowhere to put the next sentence. "What happened out there?" Grant looked toward the window. "People came to the house." "That's not what I asked." "No." "Was Rook there?" Grant stopped. His breathing barely changed. "Enough." Tessa's hands slowly unfolded. "Oh." Grant waited until a delivery truck passed outside. He was. Tessa did not tell him she was sorry. She did not ask how. Not then. Later that morning, police moved Tessa to a small municipal conference room rather than send her back to the motel. Grant was there because investigators wanted both of them to review the original material. The state investigator leading the session was Detective Evelyn Shaw, 52, lean and long-faced, with short salt and pepper hair and narrow brown eyes that missed very little. She wore a dark grey raincoat over plain clothes and kept a legal pad aligned perfectly with the edge of the table. 23 years investigating violent crime had taught her not to fill silence merely because a room became uncomfortable. She connected Tessa's phone to a monitor. Start from 5 minutes before Mr. Calder appears. They watched. Harbour. Boats. Tessa talking to viewers about the coast. A gull stealing something from a trash can. People moving behind her. Tessa watched faces. Grant watched repetition. A white service van crossed the background. A man carried a padded envelope toward the marina office. Pause. Evelyn stopped the video. Grant leaned closer. Back 7 seconds. She did. The man crossed the frame again. Blue work shirt. Baseball cap. Envelope in his right hand. He handed it to someone near the office door. The receiver was mostly blocked. Tessa frowned. That? Grant nodded. What am I looking at? I don't know yet. Evelyn glanced at him. Useful distinction. A few minutes later, Grant stopped the footage again. The same white van. This time the rear door stood open. Tessa leaned closer. Wait. She searched through photographs she had taken before the live stream. One harbor image showed the van in the corner. Faint lettering ran along its side. North Coast Marine Service. Evelyn wrote the name down. Tessa looked at Grant. You knew it mattered before you knew what it said. I knew it repeated. That's all? That's usually enough to look twice. They watched another 30 seconds. Tessa spoke first. Stop. At the far edge of the frame stood Martin Kells. He was not looking at Grant. He was looking toward the white service van. A man beside the van raised one hand. Martin answered with a small nod. Nothing dramatic. Barely a greeting. But Tessa remembered Martin as someone who occupied space loudly. On the video, that nod looked private. Did he know them? She asked. I don't know, Grant said. You keep saying that, because I don't. His eyes stayed on the frozen image, but now we know where to ask. Until then, Tessa had believed she had accidentally brought danger into Grant's life with one careless live stream. Now she wondered whether danger had already been standing near the marina before she ever lifted her phone. That did not absolve her, but it changed the weight. By afternoon, investigators had timestamps rather than answers. The service van entered the marina area at 10:41. The envelope changed hands at 10:52. Tessa began live streaming shortly before 11. None of it proved a crime. It gave investigators events to compare against lawful records from the phones recovered on the island. Evelyn left to make calls. Grant remained at the table. Tessa noticed an olive canvas bag beneath his chair. 4 faded letters were stamped across one side. Navy. You were Navy? Grant followed her eyes. Long time ago. That explains almost nothing about you. It explains one thing. What? The bag. Against her will, Tessa almost laughed. Grant's mouth moved at one corner. Almost. Evelyn returned with another investigator and placed a printed form on the table. Mr. Calder, I need prior service information for the interagency request. Branch? Navy. Specialty? Grant paused. Naval Special Warfare. Tessa looked up. Grant kept writing. No explanation followed. Evelyn did not ask for one in front of her. That told Tessa almost as much as the answer. The day stretched. By early evening, fatigue had hollowed the room. Tessa went downstairs for coffee and returned with 2 cups. Grant sat alone beside the table. His left hand had dropped loosely beside the chair. For a moment, his fingers moved once against empty air, then stopped. Tessa remembered where Rook had stood at the marina, always close to that side. She placed the second coffee near Grant without mentioning it. Thanks. A few minutes later, Evelyn returned carrying 2 printed records. One came from lawful data recovered from the phone evidence. The other came from a marina-related business transaction. She laid them side by side. Same registered agent. Same mailing address. Different company names. Grant bent forward. The fatigue disappeared from his eyes. He touched one line with his index finger. I've seen this before. Tessa looked at him. When? Grant rubbed one thumb over the worn edge of his field watch. 11 years ago. The woman who arrived the next morning did not knock twice. Evelyn had barely opened the conference room door before Special Agent Mara Vance stepped inside, carrying a narrow black document case. Mara was 47, about 5'7", with a lean frame and straight-backed posture. Her dark hair, heavily threaded with silver, was cut in a plain bob at her jaw and tucked behind both ears. Dark brown eyes moved quickly without appearing hurried. A permanent line sat between her eyebrows. She wore a navy blazer over a pale blue-grey Oxford shirt, charcoal trousers, and low black leather boots. Nothing tactical, nothing dramatic. Grant saw her and stopped writing. Mara saw him and did not smile. 11 years had added silver to her hair and more restraint to her face. "You look terrible," she said. Grant glanced at the legal pad. "So do you." Tessa looked between them. Mara placed her credential on the table. Then a federal preservation order. Then an old file thick enough to require 2 metal clips, much of the cover blacked out by redaction bars. No reunion, no handshake. Mara turned toward Evelyn. "You can question him. You can retain anything properly entered into evidence. You cannot publish his prior operational identity or release his service history without clearance." Evelyn read the first page. "I wasn't planning to." "Good." Mara looked at Grant. "And you don't get to disappear this time." Grant leaned back. "I didn't disappear. You bought a house on an island. It was for sale." Tessa lowered her eyes to hide the beginning of a smile. The story came out in pieces. That was the only way Grant seemed willing to give it. Mara supplied the next layer when a form required it. He was a SEAL. Tessa looked at Grant. He kept his attention on the file. No medals were mentioned. No impossible missions. Years after the part of Grant's career centered on direct operations, his ability to see patterns in maritime movement had put him in support of an interagency task force investigating organized maritime crime along the northeastern seaboard. Not because he was the best shot in a room, because he noticed things. A vessel appearing in 2 ports under different ownership. A trucking company billing fuel for vehicles it did not own. A warehouse leased by one company and insured by another. Men who claimed not to know one another but used the same freight broker. Grant understood how movement created patterns, and how people who wanted to disappear inside commerce still left repetition behind. Tessa watched him while Mara spoke. Grant seemed uncomfortable with every sentence describing something he had been good at. That interested her more than the accomplishments. "What happened 11 years ago?" she asked. Mara looked at Grant. He gave the smallest nod. Mara turned the file sideways. 2 men stood outside a warehouse near a coastal freight terminal. One was Adrian Sloane, younger then, dark-haired, long-faced, composed beneath an expensive wool coat. The second resembled him around the eyes but was heavier through the shoulders. "Daniel Sloane," Mara said. "Adrian's younger brother." Grant spoke. "We were serving warrants." His voice had flattened. Daniel resisted. "Resisted how?" Tessa asked. "He pulled a weapon." Tessa looked at him. "Did you kill him?" Mara's eyes moved toward her. Grant's did not. "I was there." It was not an answer. Everyone knew it. Mara closed the photograph back into the file. The operation took down one section of the network. It did not reach Adrian. Why? Because suspicion is not evidence, Mara said, and association is not conspiracy. Grant's mouth tightened. He remembered the language, probably word for word. Then names started leaking, Mara said. Not publicly. Private channels. Addresses appearing where they should not. A witness stopped answering calls. Another disappeared before a grand jury appearance. One task force member drove his wife across 3 states before sunrise after someone photographed their house. Sources vanished. Families moved. The case against Adrian remained incomplete. Tessa looked at Grant. You thought leaving would protect everyone around you. Grant did not answer. Mara did. He thought a lot of things. Grant met her eyes. There was history in the silence, but not hostility. 2 people who had survived the same failure and assigned themselves different sentences for it. Over the next few days, Tessa learned that Grant's competence looked less impressive up close. He slept badly. He hated crowded hallways. He chose restaurant booths where his back could touch a wall. When a delivery driver dropped a metal dolly outside the municipal building, Grant's shoulders locked before his face changed. Then he continued drinking coffee. Once, Tessa found him beside a rental car with the passenger door open. He had been there long enough for the dome light to shut itself off. "What are you doing?" Grant looked at the empty seat. Nothing. Tessa glanced at the floorboard. There was enough room there for a large dog. She did not ask. Grant closed the door. Tessa remained under temporary protective arrangements while investigators decided what they needed from her. Most days were not dramatic. They were waiting. Questions. Records. Windows checked twice. Calls home kept short. Her older sister, Rachel Monroe, was 44, a high school librarian with curly dark auburn hair, practical brown eyes, and a patient voice that could make teenagers return overdue books without realizing they had been scolded. Rachel had helped Tessa care for their mother whenever work and family allowed. She knew the difference between Tessa being tired and Tessa hiding something. On the fifth evening, Tessa stood near a hallway window with the phone against her ear. Grant was 20 feet away reviewing manifests with Mara. Rachel's voice carried faintly through the quiet room. "You sound strange. I'm tired." "Are you still in Maine?" Tessa looked toward Grant. He had not looked up. "Yes. Is something wrong?" Tessa watched Mara slide another page across the table. Grant's left thumb rubbed once along the edge of his field watch. Then Tessa heard herself say it. "Don't worry. I'm safe." Grant stopped moving. Not visibly enough for Rachel to notice from another state. Enough for Mara to notice from across the table. Enough for Tessa to notice when she looked at him. Then she remembered the phrase she had hated hearing from her mother. "I'm okay." The sentence people used when the truth would frighten someone they loved. Grant looked away first. Tessa finished the call. When she returned to the table, Grant had closed the file. "What?" "Nothing. Don't." Grant stared at the cover. Tessa waited. Finally, he said, "You lied to her." Her face hardened. "To keep her from worrying. I know. That's my business. I know." She folded her arms. "You seem very interested in telling me what you know, and not very interested in telling me what you think." Mara gathered 2 folders. "I'm getting coffee." Neither acknowledged the favor. When the door closed, Grant said, "You should go home." Tessa laughed once. There was no humor in it. "Of course. I mean it. I know you do. That's the problem." Grant stood. "You staying here doesn't help the investigation. So now this is about efficiency? It's about you starting to live like this." "Like what?" Grant gestured toward the dark window. "You check reflections before you walk outside. You stopped calling people unless you know where they are. You tell your sister you're safe when you don't know if you are." Tessa opened her mouth. Grant kept going. "This is how it starts." "How what starts?" He stopped. Looked down at his hands, disappearing. The word sat between them. Tessa lowered her voice. "Maybe I don't want to go home and wait for somebody to decide whether I'm safe. I'm not asking you to wait." "What are you asking?" Grant did not answer. She did. "You want me gone because then you don't have to think about me." "That isn't true. It's convenient." Grant turned toward the window. Tessa watched his shoulders. For once she could see the argument happening before he buried it. She softened, but only slightly. "We could leave." Grant turned back. "Where?" "Anywhere. He'll follow. Then we keep leaving." Grant stared at her. Tessa expected him to dismiss the idea. He did not. That frightened her more. For several seconds, Grant Calder looked like a man being offered something he genuinely wanted. Not adventure, not romance. Permission to run without running alone. Then he looked away. The argument resumed the next morning. Quieter. Tessa made the final decision herself. She would return to Rachel's town, cooperate remotely with investigators, and stop broadcasting real-time locations until the case changed. Grant did not tell her it was the right decision. At the curb outside the municipal building, Tessa adjusted the strap of her canvas bag. Grant stood beside her. No hug, no promise. Tessa touched the braided bracelet around her wrist, olive and faded burgundy. Her mother had chosen the colors years earlier, while Tessa made bracelets at the hospital simply to keep her hands occupied during long treatments. Tessa untied it. Grant saw what she was doing. "Don't. I'm not giving it to you." She took his left wrist. Grant allowed it. Tessa looped the bracelet beside his field watch and pulled the knot tight. "I'm making sure you owe me something." Grant looked at it. "What? That's your problem." A car horn sounded from the curb. Tessa stepped back. Grant looked as if there were half a dozen things he might say. He chose one. "I won't teach you how to disappear." Tessa held his eyes. "Then don't disappear." She got into the car. Grant remained on the sidewalk until it turned the corner. Mara found him 20 minutes later in the conference room. She carried a new list. No sympathy, no questions about Tessa. She placed the pages in front of Grant. "These are the companies linked to the current transfers." Grant scanned the names: warehousing, marine maintenance, freight brokerage.
Equipment leasing.
Most meant nothing. Then one did. His finger stopped halfway down the second page. The company name was different from the one he remembered. The address was different. The offices were different. But the filing structure was not. Grant pulled the old redacted folder closer, compared 2 pages. 11 years apart, different names, same architecture. Mara watched his face. "What?" Grant tapped the line. "The network didn't survive." Mara frowned. Grant looked at the newer company name. It adapted. Over the next 8 weeks, Grant Calder fired no weapon and hunted no one. That fact would have disappointed anyone who wanted the story to become simpler. Most mornings began beneath fluorescent lights. Grant sat across from spreadsheets, shipping manifests, incorporation records, fuel invoices, insurance forms, and photographs of boats that looked almost identical unless someone knew which details mattered. The old olive combat shirt was washed at night and worn again the next morning. Tessa's braided bracelet remained beside the field watch on his left wrist. Mara stopped asking whether he planned to remove it. Grant stopped pretending he had not noticed her noticing. The task force worked out of 3 adjoining rooms in a federal building near the coast. No wall of photographs connected by red string. Mostly paper. Grant preferred paper. Paper did not care how convincing someone sounded. It cared whether numbers agreed. The men who attacked the island gave investigators their first useful chain. A rented boat led to a payment service. The payment service led to a marine equipment company. That company paid storage fees to another corporation. The warehouse on the invoices belonged to someone else entirely. Grant drew no conclusions until a pattern repeated. Then he drew one too quickly. The first company he became convinced belonged to Adrian turned out to be real. Not clean because lawyers had made it appear clean. Actually real. Its owner was 63 and repaired commercial refrigeration systems. 14 employees, 2 service vans, a mortgage, a bowling trophy behind his desk. Grant spent nearly 3 days trying to make the numbers confess to something they had not done. Mara dropped the tax records in front of him. "He fixes freezers," Grant continued reading. "He fixes a lot of freezers. He owns a refrigeration company." Grant turned another page. Mara waited. Grant looked up. "I was wrong. Again. I said I was wrong. I wanted to enjoy it." Grant pushed the folder toward her. "You done? For now." He almost smiled. Being wrong bothered him less than it once had. 11 years earlier, mistakes had felt dangerous enough to hide. Now he wrote them down. Their next lead was Leonard Price. Leonard was 64, narrow through the shoulders, with a bald crown surrounded by wisps of white hair and wire-frame glasses he constantly removed to clean, even when the lenses were already spotless. His brown cardigan had been repaired at one elbow with thread a shade too dark. He had spent 38 years making other people's numbers line up. That habit had left him suspicious of anyone who arrived with answers before asking questions. Leonard agreed to meet Mara. Then he saw Grant through the interview room glass and changed his mind. "No." Mara remained seated. "You haven't heard what we're asking. I know what case this is." Grant studied him. Leonard's hands were steady. His eyes were not. "You're being paid," Grant said. Leonard looked at him. Mara turned sharply. Grant continued. "Someone got to you." Leonard stood. "No." He took his coat and left. Grant had misread fear for guilt. Again. 2 days later, Mara found out why. Leonard had an adult daughter who depended on him for daily help after a serious illness. He was the person who drove her to appointments, handled groceries when she was too tired, and kept a spare key to her apartment. He had received no money, no direct threat. He simply remembered what had happened to people who spoke 11 years earlier and knew exactly who would pay first if his name surfaced. Mara told Grant in the hallway. Grant stood with both hands in his cargo pockets. "Bring him back?" Mara asked. He said no. "You think he has records. He probably does. Then why stop?" Grant looked through the glass wall into the empty interview room. Because he said no. Mara studied him. That's new. Grant did not ask what she meant. 4 days later, Leonard returned on his own. He carried a cardboard document box against his chest. No lawyer, no speech. He placed it on Mara's table. "Copies," he said. "The originals are somewhere safer." Grant did not reach for them immediately. Leonard removed his glasses. "My daughter doesn't know any of this. She doesn't need to," Grant said. Leonard looked at him for a long moment, then pushed the box across. Inside were 7 years of billing records from 3 companies whose names never appeared together. Until then. The numbers began gathering weight. 6 shell corporations. 23 freight movements that did not match declared cargo. 4 warehouses. Payments routed through 3 states. More than $9 million moving through businesses that, on paper, had almost no reason to transact with one another. Still, Mara made Grant circle one sentence on the whiteboard. "Pattern is not proof. He hated it. She knew he hated it. That was why she left it there." One afternoon, Grant found transaction data linking a freight broker directly to a vessel used by one of Adrian's old associates. He put the printout in front of Mara. "There." Mara read it, then set it down. "We can't use this." Grant stared at her. "It's accurate. That isn't what I said. The account is theirs. I know. Then use it." Mara leaned back. "We don't have a clean evidentiary path for how this copy was obtained." Grant's jaw shifted. Mara tapped the page. Knowing it happened and proving it happened are different jobs. Grant looked at the whiteboard. "Pattern is not proof." He walked out. 10 minutes later he came back. The printout remained on the table. Grant picked it up. "What can we use?" Mara handed him a subpoena request. That was the conversation. Tessa remained hundreds of miles away. Her involvement became narrower and safer. Investigators contacted her when they needed original metadata, photographs, or timestamps from the marina. She did not return to Maine. Grant did not ask her to. One secure evidence transfer included the photograph showing North Coast Marine Service. At the bottom of the submission form, beneath the official description, someone had typed, "Hope this one is useful." No name was necessary. Grant read the sentence once, then went back to work. The bracelet stayed on his wrist. Subpoenaed vendor records finally answered what the white van had been doing at the marina. North Coast Marine Service was a legitimate contractor used by Harbour Shield for camera maintenance and equipment checks. The man Tessa had captured beside the van was a Harbour Shield field contractor Martin Kells knew from routine visits. The company itself was not the criminal front Grant had first suspected. But several service visits matched dates when unauthorized batches of marina reporting data were accessed and forwarded through an intermediary account. That distinction mattered. Martin had known the contractor. He had not known where the information traveled after leaving Harbour Shield. The next witness was Denise Harrow, 55, manager of a commercial warehouse near the coast. Denise was broad-shouldered, with strong forearms, iron-grey hair braided down the back of her neck, and a face weathered by 30 years of loading docks and winter wind. She wore steel-toed boots and kept a carpenter's pencil behind one ear, despite having no reason Grant could determine to carry one indoors. She did not think of herself as a whistleblower. She thought of herself as a woman who hated incorrect paperwork. Denise identified 12 invoices bearing her electronic approval. She had approved 5. Someone had copied her authorization onto the others. She placed a genuine invoice beside a false one. No speech. Just a thick finger tapping 2 timestamps. I wasn't here that day. Another piece. Then came Owen Rusk, 61. A commercial boat captain with a white beard cut close along a deeply lined face and permanently narrowed blue eyes from decades of glare off open water. Owen did not remember company names. He remembered boats. Different exhaust note, he said after listening to an old harbor recording. Mara looked at him. That's what you remember? Owen shrugged. You remember voices. I remember engines. He identified a vessel used on 3 supposedly unrelated trips. 3 witnesses. 3 kinds of memory. None could see the whole structure. Together, they were beginning to. Adrian answered before the task force was ready. Not with bullets, with a story. A shortened marina video appeared on several small online channels. It showed Grant lowering his cap whenever a fixed security camera entered his path. Then it froze on the accidental livestream frame where his face appeared behind Tessa. The next image was a news photograph of Grant's island behind police tape. A caption called him a former military operative connected to a shooting that left 2 men dead. Nothing in the sentence was technically false. That was what made it effective. Within 48 hours, Grant's face appeared in places he had spent years ensuring it never appeared. People slowed outside the federal building. A reporter shouted his name across a parking lot. Someone online called him a murderer. Someone else called him a hero. Grant disliked both with equal intensity. Mara watched him close a browser window. You want us to respond? With what? The facts we can release. They don't want facts. Some do. Grant rubbed a thumb over the bracelet. The agency eventually issued a narrow statement. Grant Calder was a former member of Naval Special Warfare and had previously supported a federal interagency task force. The deaths on the island remained under active investigation. No operational history. No missions. No heroic biography. For a man who had built his life around not being seen incorrectly was almost a perfect punishment. He endured it. That too was new. The fixer came on a wet Thursday evening. Grant recognized what he was before Mara did. Not the man, the type. Elias Venn was 54, tall and spare, with close-cut grey hair, a narrow, clean-shaven face, and a dark wool coat too expensive for the weather, but too plain to advertise its price. He carried no briefcase. Rain darkened his shoulders without disturbing his composure. Elias had spent most of his career as the man between men who did not want to speak directly. He never threatened when implication would do. He never raised his voice because raised voices created witnesses. He approached Grant outside a diner 2 blocks from the federal building. Mr. Calder. Grant stopped. Mara was inside paying for coffee. Grant looked at Elias's empty hands. You have 30 seconds. Elias nodded. He wants the file gone. Grant said nothing. The woman goes home, stays home. Nobody contacts her. Grant's eyes changed. Only slightly. Elias continued. You return to your island. Rain collected along Grant's shirt collar. No more surveillance. No more visitors. No more old names appearing in new places. Grant looked past Elias toward traffic sliding through wet pavement. For years that had been all he wanted. A house off the coast, a closed door, no cameras. No strangers. No one close enough to be hurt because of him. Elias was not threatening to take Grant's life. He was offering to give it back. Grant looked down. The olive and burgundy bracelet rested against the black strap of his old watch. Think about that. The enemy does not always tempt a man with money, power, or revenge. Sometimes he offers the one thing that man has spent years begging the world to give him. Silence. Distance. A place where no one can reach him. If freedom requires you to become invisible again, is it freedom or just a quieter prison? Elias followed Grant's gaze. Think about what he's offering. Grant raised his eyes. I have. Elias waited. No. Nothing in Elias's expression changed. You may regret that. Probably. Mara emerged from the diner holding 2 coffees. Elias stepped away. Grant did not follow him. That mattered more than Elias knew. 3 days later, Leonard's records produced a lawful subpoena. The subpoena produced bank records. Those records produced another warrant. Denise Harrow's invoices aligned with them. Owen Rusk's vessel identification connected 3 freight movements investigators had previously treated as unrelated. Tessa's original timestamps fixed marina activity to specific minutes. The phones recovered after the island attack linked the hired men to an intermediary. That intermediary connected directly to AS, Logistics. AS, Logistics connected back to 2 of Adrian's shell corporations. The letters Grant had seen on the attacker's phone were no longer a loose end. They were part of a lawful chain. 1 witness became 3. 3 became 7. People who had spent years assuming they were the only person holding a useless fragment discovered other fragments existed. The case stopped depending on Grant. That was when it became dangerous to Adrian. Before dawn on a Monday, teams executed coordinated warrants at multiple locations. Grant was not invited. He did not ask to go. By 8:15, Mara returned to the conference room. She placed her phone on the table. 11 initial arrests. Grant waited. Adrian? Mara nodded. Federal custody. Grant looked down at the files covering the table. 6 shell companies. 23 freight movements. 4 warehouses. More than $9 million in traced movement. 8 weeks of people deciding, one at a time, that fear was no longer enough reason to stay silent. He felt no triumph, mostly fatigue. He saw Adrian that afternoon by accident. Grant was leaving an interview room when 2 federal officers came through the opposite end of a corridor. Adrian walked between them. At 56, he was leaner than in the old photograph. Dark gray hair swept neatly to one side, silver at the temples. His face remained long and clean-shaven, his heavy gray-brown eyes giving away almost nothing. He wore an ivory shirt beneath a charcoal blazer, as if someone had interrupted him on the way to an ordinary business meeting. No shouting. No threat. Adrian saw Grant. The officers kept moving. For 3 steps the 2 men looked at each other. Grant had imagined the encounter in uglier ways, especially after Rook. Reality offered no music. No revenge. Just a man who had spent years making other people afraid to speak, and another man who had finally stopped trying to solve everything alone. Adrian passed him. Neither said a word. Grant remained where he was until the corridor door closed behind them. Nearly a year after the arrests, Adrian Sloan went to trial. The case had grown beyond the 11 people arrested that first morning. Some defendants pleaded guilty. Others cooperated. 3 shell companies were dissolved before the year ended, and several others were placed under federal control while courts separated legitimate ownership from criminal proceeds. Millions of dollars in accounts, vessels, and commercial property entered forfeiture proceedings. Older files reopened. Witnesses once treated as unrelated names appeared again in new interview rooms. Not every question received an answer. Not every loss became useful, simply because someone was finally prosecuted for causing part of it. Grant understood that better than most. Adrian was eventually convicted on several major federal counts tied to the criminal network. Grant did not attend every day of the trial. He attended the day Mara asked him to. He sat near the back in the same faded olive combat shirt he had worn through nearly every stage of the investigation. Moss green combat pants worn smooth at the knees, and old brown work boots planted flat beneath the bench. Tessa's bracelet remained beside his field watch. Adrian never looked toward him when the verdicts were read. Grant preferred it that way. There was no satisfaction in watching another man become a number attached to a case file, only finality, and even that came slowly. Martin Kells lost his position at the marina before Adrian's trial ended. Investigators found that Harbour Shield had paid Martin modest referral and reporting fees over several years. Nothing that looked like criminal wealth. No hidden house. No expensive truck. No secret account. Just small payments deposited beside ordinary wages. Martin had shared vessel descriptions, unusual customer reports, and Marina access information because he believed he was helping a security contractor protect local businesses. What he had never asked was who could see the information after he sent it. A local reporter caught him leaving an administrative hearing. Martin looked older than Grant remembered. His thinning grey hair had gone almost white around the ears, and without the Marina counter between him and everyone else, the broad red face seemed less imposing. The reporter asked why he had done it. Martin stopped beside his pickup. For several seconds, he looked at the keys in his hand. Then he said, "I thought I was helping keep the Marina safe." He got into the truck, that was all. Grant watched the clip once, then closed it. He did not hate Martin. Hatred required more room than Grant wanted to give him. Besides, Martin had spent years believing danger always looked suspicious. Grant had spent years believing safety always looked like distance. Men could build entire lives around the wrong idea and still call it common sense. In the early spring after the verdict, Grant took the boat back to the island, alone. The crossing was calm. That made it worse. For 3 years, Rook had stood near the bow whenever the island came into sight, black saddle dark against honey gold fur, left ear straight and notched right ear angled toward the wind. Now there was only rope coiled beside the cleat. Grant kept his eyes on the shoreline. The house appeared between the spruce. One boarded window had been replaced. The porch had weathered another shade of grey. Nothing dramatic had happened to the place. Houses were good at surviving people. Grant tied off and climbed the path carrying one small canvas bag. At the front door, he unlocked the deadbolt, then pushed the door wider than necessary. His hand remained on it. Rook had hated closed doors. Grant stood there for several seconds before realizing what he had done. The house offered no answer. He stepped inside. Dust had gathered lightly on the furniture. The kitchen table remained where investigators had returned it after the case closed. Grant opened one window, then another. Cold air moved through the rooms. He did not turn on the radio. He did not open the laptop. Instead, he stood in the kitchen. The 2 ceramic bowls were still near the stove. One no longer belonged to anyone. Grant crouched. He picked up Rook's water bowl with both hands. A faint mineral line circled the inside where water had dried months earlier. Grant carried it to the sink, turned on the tap, washed it, slowly, not because it was difficult, because there was no reason to hurry. He dried the bowl with a kitchen towel. For one moment he looked toward the floor beside the stove. He could put it back. No one would know. He could leave the house exactly as it had been and return every few weeks to protect a life that no longer existed. Grant turned toward the shelf above the workbench. He placed the bowl there, not hidden, not discarded, just no longer waiting on the floor. Grant rested one hand against the edge of the shelf. The room remained quiet, but for the first time, the quiet did not feel like something he had successfully defended. It felt like an empty room. There was a difference. Grant closed the windows, checked the generator, covered the furniture. At the bedroom door, he stopped and left it open. Outside, he locked the front door. He put the key in his pocket. Grant did not decide whether he would sell the house. He did not decide whether he would return. For once, he allowed a question to remain unanswered without turning it into a threat. He walked down to the boat. When the island disappeared behind him, he did not look over his shoulder. Tessa's life became ordinary again. Not identical, ordinary. She returned to work. She called Rachel without first deciding which parts of the truth to remove. She still traveled occasionally, but stopped broadcasting places while she was still standing in them. Sometimes she posted photographs afterward. Sometimes she took photographs and kept them for herself. That surprised her most. Her phone no longer had to prove a moment had happened. One Tuesday morning, months after Adrian's conviction, Tessa was late for work. She stepped into her tan field jacket, picked up the charcoal canvas bag, and searched the kitchen counter for her phone. It was already in her hand. She laughed quietly at herself, then opened the front door. Something hung from the outside handle. A braided bracelet, muted olive, faded burgundy. The knot was tighter now, but Tessa recognized the uneven place where one strand had always been shorter than the others. Her hand closed around it. No note, no envelope, no name. Tessa stepped onto the porch. The morning was cool enough to make her breath visible. Across the residential street stood Grant Calder, 50 years old. Square jaw, clean-shaven as always. Dark brown hair cut short, a few silver strands at the temples. Grey-blue eyes fixed on her. The same worn olive combat shirt. The same moss-green pants. The same old boots. No cap. No sunglasses. Nothing between his face and the world. Tessa did not smile immediately. Neither did Grant. For a few seconds they simply stood there. Her phone was still in her right hand. The camera faced outward by accident. Grant noticed. His eyes dropped to it. Tessa saw the movement. Months earlier, that would have been enough. He would have turned his head, shifted his body, stepped out of frame before she understood what he was doing. This time Grant stayed exactly where he was. Tessa looked at the phone, then pressed the side button. The screen went black. She lowered it. Grant's shoulders moved with one quiet breath. Tessa lifted the bracelet in her other hand. You took your time. Grant looked at it. I had something to finish. That excuse only works once. I know. She finally smiled. Small, careful, real. Grant did the same. Then he stepped off the opposite curb. Tessa remained on the porch. She did not raise the phone. Grant crossed the street toward the one person who knew exactly where to find him.